A company went public on the stock market in Shanghai recently, and nobody in the chip industry saw it coming. By the time the closing bell rang, its shares had jumped 535% in a single day. That is not a typo. A Chinese memory chip maker called Changxin Memory Technologies, or CXMT for short, opened for trading, and within hours became worth more than virtually every other publicly traded company in mainland China. Its total value reached about 3%, 3 trillion yuan, which is roughly 460 billion. To put that in perspective, that is bigger than Intel, AMD, and Qualcomm combined. This was not some internet startup or a flashy social media app. This was a company that makes DRAM memory chips, the same kind of chips sitting inside your phone, your laptop, your gaming console, and the massive data centers powering artificial intelligence. The chip industry had spent years assuming China could not catch up to the big players. CXMT just blew past every single one of those expectations. For decades, the global DRAM market was controlled by just 3 companies: Samsung and SK in South Korea, and Micron in the United States. Those 3 controlled about 95% of the entire world's supply. Everyone assumed that would never change, but it just did. And the giant that emerged is bigger than anyone predicted. If you are enjoying videos like this, please hit the like button because it takes a lot of effort to make these, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. What happened in Shanghai that morning is not just a business story or a finance headline. It is a signal about where the global technology race is heading, and most people are not paying attention yet. The ripple effects from this single stock market debut are going to reach into every data center, every AI lab, every smartphone factory, and every government policy meeting on the planet. But to understand why this matters so much, you first need to understand what DRAM actually does, and why the company that makes it just became the most valuable listed company in all of mainland China. The morning everything changed, the Shanghai Stock Exchange opened for trading like any other morning. Investors had their screens pulled up, analysts were sipping their coffee, and the financial world was going about its usual routine. CXMT had priced its initial public offering at around $36 per share. That is the price at which a private company first sells shares to the public. The price was reasonable and expected. Nothing about it suggested anything unusual was about to happen. Then trading began. Within the first hour, the stock price started climbing, not slowly, not gradually, like a rocket. It shot up so fast that the exchange had to hit the brakes multiple times. Circuit breakers, which are emergency stops built into the trading system, kicked in to pause trading. These tools exist for exactly this kind of situation, when a stock rises too fast and the exchange needs a moment to catch its breath. But every time trading resumed, the stock kept climbing. By the time the dust settled at the closing bell, the stock had risen about 466% above its IPO price. If you had been lucky enough to buy shares at the offering price, you would have more than quadrupled your money in a single trading session. Think about that for a second. When was the last time you saw an American tech company do that? The truth is, it almost never happens anymore in mature markets. The United States stock market is steady and predictable. Day one surges of 400% or more are very rare. But this was something else entirely, and it was not built on empty speculation. The IPO raised about $6 billion in fresh capital. That is real money from big investment funds, government wealth funds, and regular traders who all wanted a piece of this company. They were not gambling on a hype trend. They were making a deliberate bet on the future of China's chip industry. The fact that CXMT became the most valuable listed company in mainland China on its very first day tells you something important. They could have listed a consumer internet giant, or a gaming company, or an e-commerce platform. Instead, they listed a memory chip maker, and the market went absolutely wild for it. That is not an accident. It tells you that China's chip giant is already surpassing what the industry thought was possible. But to understand why investors were so eager to pour billions into a DRAM company, you need to understand what DRAM actually does and why it sits at the heart of modern computing. Why DRAM matters more than you think. DRAM stands for Dynamic Random Access Memory. If that sounds technical, do not worry. Think of it like this. Imagine your phone or your computer is a kitchen. The processor is the chef cooking up calculations and getting work done. The hard drive or storage is the pantry where all your ingredients are stored. DRAM is the countertop. It is the space where the chef lays out everything currently being used. The bigger the countertop, the more ingredients the chef can work with at the same time, and the faster everything gets done. Every time you open a browser tab, that is DRAM at work. Every time you switch between apps on your phone without losing your place, that is DRAM holding things in memory. Every time a video game loads a new level without freezing, that is DRAM doing its job behind the scenes. It is the short-term memory of every device you own. Without it, nothing works, and the demand for it is exploding. The artificial intelligence boom has created a huge appetite for memory. When an AI model trains on billions of parameters, it needs to pull information from storage, process it, and write results back at incredible speed. That requires massive amounts of high bandwidth memory. The more advanced AI becomes, the more DRAM it needs. Not just a little more, but way more. Every new data center being built right now, every cloud computing expansion, every AI startup training a new model, all of them are consuming DRAM at a rate that would have seemed impossible just 5 years ago. So when a Chinese company that makes this exact kind of memory becomes one of the most valuable companies on earth in a single day, it tells you the chip industry is in for a big surprise. It is not because memory chips are glamorous, it is because they are essential. They are the invisible backbone of the entire digital economy. Your car has DRAM in its infotainment system. Your refrigerator probably has a small chip keeping its smart features running. The server racks inside Amazon, Google, and Microsoft data centers are stuffed with DRAM modules. And here is the part that makes this story so significant. For decades, almost all of that DRAM came from just 3 companies. The oligopoly nobody dared challenge. For over 20 years, the global DRAM market has been one of the most concentrated industries on the planet. Samsung in South Korea has been the dominant player, controlling a huge chunk of the market. SK Hynix, also based in South Korea, holds another large portion, and Micron Technology in the United States takes most of what remains. Together, those 3 companies controlled about 95% of all DRAM production worldwide. That is an almost unimaginable level of concentration. Think about it this way. If 3 bakeries controlled 95% of all the bread made on Earth, you would probably think something was wrong with that market. But in the chip world, this was just considered normal. The reason is simple. Making DRAM is incredibly hard. It requires massive fabrication plants that cost billions of dollars to build. It requires engineering expertise that takes decades to develop. It requires precision equipment that can print circuit patterns smaller than a virus. The barriers to entry are so high that most countries never even try. Several companies over the years attempted to break into the DRAM market and failed. Alpa in Japan went bankrupt. Commander in Germany collapsed. Na in Taiwan scaled back dramatically. The lesson everyone learned was the same. Do not try to compete with Samsung, SKH, and Micron. The 3 of them have the scale, the experience, and the muscle to crush anyone who tries. And for a long time, that is exactly how things stayed. China watched from the sidelines. They imported DRAM chips by the billions, paying whatever price the big 3 demanded. Every smartphone factory in Shenzhen, every server farm in Beijing, every electronics maker across the country relied on memory chips designed and built in South Korea and the United States. Nobody in the industry thought China could build a company big enough to challenge that setup. The gap seemed too wide. The head start seemed too large. But China had been quietly planning something. And what they did next is something almost nobody in the Western chip world believed was possible. How China built a chip giant from scratch. CXMT did not appear overnight. The company was founded in 2016, which means it went from a startup to the most valuable listed company in mainland China in less than a decade. That timeline is staggering when you consider how long it took Samsung and Micron to reach similar scale. Samsung has been making memory chips since the 1980s. Micron was founded in 1978. CXMT did it in under 10 years. How? The answer involves a combination of government backing, aggressive hiring of engineers, and a strategy that prioritized scale over perfection. The Chinese government identified chips as a critical national priority years ago. They poured state loans, infrastructure support, and policy incentives into companies like CXMT. This was not a secret. It was openly discussed in Beijing's planning documents. The goal was self-sufficiency. If foreign suppliers ever cut China off, the country needed its own chip industry to keep running. CXM benefited from this push more than almost any other company. They received funding to build fabrication plants, hire engineers, and purchase manufacturing equipment. And they did something else that turned out to be incredibly effective. They focused on getting good enough rather than getting perfect. Their first DRAM chips were not the most advanced in the world. They did not match Samsung's cutting-edge products in density or power efficiency, but they worked. They were functional, reliable, and most importantly, they were cheaper. That is a powerful combination in the chip market. CXMT started by selling chips for less critical applications, products where absolute top-tier performance was not required. Consumer electronics, budget smartphones, industrial equipment. They carved out a niche and then expanded from there. Year by year, generation by generation, they improved. They hired engineers from South Korea, Taiwan, and the United States. They invested heavily in research and development. They built new fabrication plants and ramped up production capacity, and the market noticed. By the time CXMT was ready to go public, it was producing DRAM chips at a scale that made it impossible to ignore. The company was no longer an experiment or a government project. It was a real manufacturer, making real products that competed with the established players. The investors who bought shares on IPO day were not betting on potential. They were betting on a company that was already shipping product. What started as an underdog had grown into a giant that the rest of the industry never saw coming. But the reason this matters so much goes beyond one company's stock price. It connects to the artificial intelligence revolution happening right now, and that is where the story gets truly enormous. The AI connection that changes everything. Artificial intelligence is the biggest technology trend in the world right now. Every major tech company is pouring billions into AI research. New language models, image generators, and autonomous systems are being developed at a pace that leaves most people struggling to keep up. But here is something that often gets overlooked in all the excitement. AI does not just need processing power, it needs memory, enormous amounts of it. When a company like OpenAI trains a new model, the process involves feeding billions of parameters through a network of processors. Those processors need to access data at incredible speeds, and the results need to be stored and retrieved just as quickly. That is where DRAM comes in. The memory bandwidth required for modern AI training is mind-boggling. We are talking about moving terabytes of data per second through a system that cannot afford even a millisecond of delay. Every new generation of AI models demands more memory than the last. And the companies building data centers for AI are buying DRAM as fast as makers can produce it. Now connect that to CXMT. A Chinese company that makes DRAM just became one of the most valuable companies on earth. It has $6 billion in fresh capital from its IPO. That money is going straight into expanding production capacity, building new fabrication plants, and hiring more engineers. China is not planning to just participate in the AI memory market. It is planning to lead it. If CXMT captures even a significant portion of the global DRAM supply, China gains leverage over every data center, every cloud provider, and every AI startup on the planet. That is not a hypothetical scenario. It is the direction things are already moving, and this is where the global implications become serious. The United States has spent the last several years trying to slow China's chip progress through export controls and sanctions. The idea was to restrict access to advanced equipment and force Chinese companies to fall behind. But CXMT's IPO suggests that plan may not be working as intended. Sanctions can slow things down, but they can also push the targeted country to work harder and build its own alternatives. That appears to be exactly what happened. China did not give up when sanctions hit. They invested more, recruited more aggressively, and built domestic supply chains that reduced their dependence on foreign technology. The result is a company that now competes with the biggest players in the most critical segment of the chip market. And with $6 billion in new funding, CXMT is positioned to accelerate that competition even further. The AI connection makes this story about much more than chips. It is about who controls the foundation of the future digital economy. What happens next? So, where does this go from here? The short answer is that the global chip landscape just shifted, and nobody knows exactly what comes next. But there are some things we can reasonably predict. First, CXMT is going to expand production aggressively. That $6 billion from the IPO is not going to sit in a bank account. It is going into new fabrication plants, more equipment, and more engineers. China wants to increase its DRAM market share, and the way to do that is by producing more chips and selling them at competitive prices. Expect CXMT to undercut Samsung and Micron on price to win customers. That is the classic strategy for a challenger entering a market controlled by established players. Second, the United States is going to have to respond. The current export control plan was designed under the assumption that China could not catch up. That assumption just took a serious hit. Policymakers in Washington are likely reassessing right now. Do they tighten sanctions further? Do they try to rally allies like South Korea and Japan into a coordinated restriction? Or do they shift toward investing more in domestic chip manufacturing? The truth is, sanctions without allies are weak, and allies like South Korea and Japan have their own economic relationships with China that they do not want to damage. This is going to lead to some very complicated and very tense talks in the coming months. Third, the established drama are watching closely. Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron now have a real competitor with serious financial backing. If CXMT starts taking market share, those companies